The storm had rolled in without warning, swallowing the coastline in a cold gray shroud. Waves slammed against the pier with the restless fury of something searching for a way in. And in the middle of that chaos stood Commander Ethan Cole, a Navy SEAL who had survived ambushes in deserts, betrayals in jungles, and nights so silent they felt haunted. Yet none of those things had ever broken him the way this moment threatened to. His son, 8-year-old Liam, had disappeared somewhere in the dense marshland beyond the coast. Search teams moved through the fog with mechanical urgency, but Ethan could sense it. They'd already begun losing hope. He saw it in the stiffness of their posture, the hesitations, the quiet exchanges they thought he couldn't hear. They believed they were searching for a body, not a living child. Ethan refused to accept that. The idea alone felt like a knife twisting beneath his ribs. He stood near the command tent, soaked to the bone, mud caking the seams of his boots, the salt air biting through layers of fabric. His eyes were raw too wide, too bright, holding back the pressure of a grief he refused to let exist. People watched him with a mixture of pity and fear. Nobody knew what to say to a man like him, especially now, when he looked hollowed out by something far stronger than combat. Hours passed, lanterns flickered, radios crackled with nothing useful, and the murmurs grew louder. Terrain's too unstable. No tracks left, floods washed everything away. Dog units lost the scent 2 hours ago. Ethan listened to all of it, each sentence like another hand forcing his head underwater, but he remained absolutely still. He had learned in the teams that stillness was sometimes the only thing that kept a man sane. It was then, at the exact moment hope felt like it was beginning to rot into despair, that a small voice broke the air. "My dog can find your son." The sentence drifted through the wind, soft but unnervingly certain, cutting through the tension like a sudden shaft of light. Ethan's head lifted slow, disbelieving, as a little girl stepped forward from the cluster of townspeople gathered behind the barricade. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, thin as a reed, a rain spotted hoodie hanging off her slight frame. Beside her stood a golden retriever with soaked fur and warm, steady eyes. The crowd reacted before Ethan did. Heads turned, faces tightened with annoyance or disbelief. Someone muttered, "Sweetheart, this isn't a game." Another shook his head. "We've already had trained K9 units. Amateur dogs won't help." A volunteer sighed in irritation. "Let the professionals handle this." The girl didn't flinch. Her hand rested on the retriever's back, a gesture not of insecurity but assurance, like she knew something the rest of them didn't. Her voice came again, fragile but firm. "He can smell things other dogs can't. He always finds what matters most." An officer stepped toward her, prepared to gently escort her away, but he froze when he caught the expression forming across Ethan's face. It wasn't anger, nor exhaustion, it was focus. For the first time since the search began, something sparked behind Ethan's eyes. The officer hesitated, the crowd waited, the wind rattled a loose sheet of metal like a distant warning. Ethan stepped closer to the girl, slowly, like a man approaching the first glimmer of oxygen after drowning. "What makes you so sure?" he asked, not unkindly. She looked up at him, and there was a gravity in her gaze far older than her years, something almost unsettling in its clarity. "Because he found me," she whispered, when nobody else could. A murmur rippled through the search teams, tiny waves of curiosity breaking against skepticism. The dog pressed closer to her leg, as though remembering something private, something painful. Ethan's chest tightened. He recognized that kind of truth, the kind shaped by survival, but the crowd wasn't convinced. A search coordinator shook his head. "Sir, with respect, we can't waste more time. Flood levels will rise again in 20 minutes. The implications stung. Choosing this girl might cost them precious time." Yet Ethan didn't look at the coordinator. He kept his eyes on the girl and the retriever, sensing something he couldn't explain. a quiet conviction radiating from a child who should have been afraid, yet wasn't. The girl knelt beside her dog. The retriever lifted his nose, sniffing the damp air as though already catching whispers hidden in the wind. And in that moment, so subtle it felt nearly divine, Ethan made a decision that startled even him. He would trust her, even if it meant defying protocol, even if it meant facing the judgment of everyone around him, even if it meant risking the only sliver of hope he had left. He crouched in front of the girl. "Tell me what you need." The crowd stilled. Every breath seemed to pause. The girl exhaled slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached into her pocket and withdrew something small, something she believed would change everything. What she held in her hand made Ethan's heart lurch hard enough to hurt. And for a moment the world went impossibly quiet. What the girl held was a small, worn wrist, band navy blue, frayed at the edges, the kind of thing a child wore everywhere until it became part of him. Liam's wristband. Ethan recognized it instantly. His breath caught, uneven and sharp, as though someone had reached inside his chest and pulled a thread too tightly. "Found it near the marsh trail," the girl murmured. "Storm almost buried it, but Max, he pulled me right to it." The retriever. Max nosed the band gently, drawing in the scent with a slow, deliberate breath. His ears pricked, body stiffening with a sudden alertness that silenced even the most skeptical among the search team. The crowd's cynicism faltered. For the first time, a ripple of genuine doubt in their own doubt, crossed their faces. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, gripping the band with trembling fingers. A storm of emotion surged through him, fear, relief, anguish, hope, but all of it simmered beneath a single, razor-sharp resolve. When he opened his eyes again, he felt anchored. Purpose had returned to him like a long, lost limb. "Let him try," Ethan said quietly. Those 3 words landed with the weight of a command nobody dared argue against. The search coordinator hesitated, jaw tight, but stepped aside. The officers exchanged uncertain glances and moved out of the dog's way. Even the civilians stepped back, swept by the gravity of Ethan's certainty. The girl gave Max a subtle nod, and the dog lowered his head, inhaling the wristband's scent again, deeper this time. Then, with a sudden, decisive pull, Max launched forward, dragging the girl slightly before she steadied herself and hurried after him. Ethan followed, boots pounding through the mud, heart hammering in his ribs. The storm had dulled into a persistent drizzle, but the wind still whipped through the trees with a voice like distant pleading. The marshland ahead was a labyrinth of reeds and sinking earth, the kind of place that swallowed footprints in seconds. Yet Max moved as though he were chasing a ghost only he could see. He darted between pools of dark water, across soggy patches of grass, deeper into the wild terrain. Each direction change felt purposeful, almost urgent. The girl, small, determined, matched his pace, her breaths short but unwavering. Ethan kept close behind them, watching every twitch of the dog's ears, every sudden pause. His mind flitted between memory and terror. Liam's laugh, Liam's fear of thunderstorms, Liam's promise that he'd be brave during the camping trip. Each memory echoed like a plea replaying inside Ethan's skull. Max halted abruptly near a fallen cypress tree. The dog lifted his head, nose twitching rapidly, muscles coiled like tightly wound springs. The girl's chest rose and fell with quick breaths as she met Ethan's gaze. "He's close," she whispered. Ethan froze. A new kind of silence pressed in around them, heavy, expectant, almost reverent. Max lunged toward a cluster of reeds, barking once, low and urgent, as though calling them to witness something hidden beneath the marsh's breath. Ethan's boots sank deeper as he pushed forward. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the dread curling inside him like a fist. Every part of him braced for the worst, for the unbearable image he had been fighting since the sun fell. He stepped around the reeds, and at first he saw nothing. Then the shape came into view, small, curled, motionless. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. The world blurred at the edges. His knees buckled under the weight of everything he feared most. But then, barely perceptible, almost imagined, the shape shifted, a hand twitched, a weak, hoarse whimper broke the stillness. "Dad!" The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't even strong, but it didn't have to be. It hit Ethan harder than any explosion he'd survived. He crashed forward through the marsh, stumbling, falling to his knees beside his son. Liam's skin was ice, cold, lips blue, his clothes torn and soaked. Mud streaked his small face, but his eyes half open, cloudy with exhaustion and fear, found Ethan's. Ethan cupped his son's face with trembling hands. Relief tore through him so violently it left him shaking. He pressed his forehead against Liam's, fighting the rise of tears that threatened to break him open completely. "You held on," Ethan whispered, voice shattering. Liam blinked slowly, fragile but alive. "I knew you'd come." Max sat beside them, tail still, eyes soft with what looked like understanding. The girl approached cautiously, her hands clasped together, as though afraid to break the sacredness of the moment unfolding before her. Ethan looked up at her, his voice thick, unsteady. "You saved him." She shook her head. "Max did. I just listened to him." But Ethan understood something deeper, something unspoken. The girl hadn't just followed the dog. She had trusted a kind of instinct the adults around her had ignored, a certainty shaped by her own hidden scars. The wind shivered through the reeds again, softer this time, no longer carrying the sting of despair. For the first time since the storm began, the world felt like it might be giving something back instead of taking it away. But what none of them knew, not yet, was that the hardest part was still ahead, that the miracle of finding Liam was only the beginning of an even more shocking truth waiting to surface. A truth Max had sensed before anyone else, and a truth that would change everything. Max's ears twitched again, but this time not toward Liam. The retriever stiffened, body angled toward the deeper marsh, as if sensing a presence the others could not. His stillness unsettled the girl immediately. She stepped closer to him, hand hovering near his collar. Ethan noticed it too, that instinct sharp, animal, something ancient ran through Max like a silent alarm. Ethan followed the dog's gaze into the fog, thickened distance. The marsh stretched ahead like a dark throat swallowing the horizon. "What is it?" Ethan asked. The girl's fingers tightened around Max's fur. "He's scared." The meaning of that word, spoken in such a quiet, brittle voice, sliced through Ethan's relief. Max hadn't shown fear even for a moment, not during the storm, not while tracking Liam, not while navigating dangerous terrain. If anything frightened a dog like that, especially one who had just led them through uncertainty without hesitation, it meant something was still out there. Something close. Ethan lifted Liam carefully into his arms. The boy was shivering, his breath shallow, but he burrowed instinctively into his father's shoulder. Ethan steadied him, shielding him from the cutting wind. Behind them, distant voices echoed, the search team finally catching up. Flashlights bobbed like small, glowing stars in the fog, but Max took a step forward, growling low. The girl paled, tugging him back gently. "Max, no." The dog refused to move. Ethan's eyes scanned the murky water, the shadows between reeds, the rippling movement beneath the surface. Something felt wrong, too quiet, too expectant, the kind of quiet that preceded violence, then another sound. Faint, wrong, a weighted splash, not natural, not the water shifting under the weather, a presence. Ethan stepped backward, gripping Liam protectively. The girl mirrored him, inching away from the water's edge. Max pressed close to her, hackles rising, muscles taut with instinctive warning. "What's out there?" she whispered. Ethan's voice lowered, steady but edged. "Something we didn't see before." There was a rustling slow, dragging followed by a thin stream of bubbles rising from the dark marsh pool. Ethan's combat, trained instincts fired all at once. His breath tightened, his senses sharpened. And then, emerging from the water in a sluggish, Unnatural movement. A large branch lifted, except it wasn't a branch. It was a trap, a hunting snare anchored beneath the water, weighted down by debris, a snare designed not for animals, but for people. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs as realizations collided violently inside him. Liam hadn't simply wandered off. He hadn't gotten lost. He hadn't fallen accidentally. He had been caught, deliberately. The air thickened with dread as Ethan crouched, inspecting the shallow mud around the reeds where Liam lay. Marks he hadn't noticed before formed a pattern drag lines, not footprints, the remnants of rope fibers. Something metallic half, buried in the muck. Someone had taken his son, and someone had tried to hide it. The girl gasped softly. Max, he was trying to tell us, Max whined now, pressing himself against her legs, trembling with urgency. Fear mixed with warning. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly, methodically, the way he'd been trained to in the worst moments of combat. But this wasn't war. This wasn't a battlefield, he understood. This was his child. This was personal in a way nothing else had ever been. Search team members finally reached them, calling out relief, filled words that died on their tongues when they saw Ethan's expression. "What's wrong?" one asked. Ethan pointed toward the snare beneath the water. That, someone put it here. A chilling silence swept over the group. Flashlights converged on the submerged trap, the glint of metal confirming Ethan's words. Faces hardened. Murmurs swelled. Fear laced with anger rippled through the rescue team. The coordinator swallowed hard. This wasn't part of the terrain. Someone did this. Ethan's gaze drifted back to Liam in his arms. The boy was conscious enough to sense the tension, his small hand finding Ethan's jacket. I slipped," Liam whispered. "A man grabbed me. I ran, I fell, I tried to hide until he left." Ethan's blood turned to ice. A man. This storm had hidden more than Liam's voice, more than his trail. It had hidden the presence of someone dangerous. Someone who might still be out there. Max barked suddenly sharp, piercing, turning toward the marsh again. His stance shifted, no longer afraid, but ready, protective. The girl knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "He wants us to leave now." Ethan understood. The dog wasn't alerting about a distant threat. He was warning about one that lingered close enough to smell. "Everyone," Ethan said, voice like carved stone, back away from the water. No one argued. They retreated carefully, moving toward higher ground. Ethan held Liam close, his steps steady but urgent. Max and the girl stayed beside him, the retriever casting glances over his shoulder every few seconds, never letting his guard down. Only once they reached the safer ridge did Max finally relax, lowering his head, exhaustion pouring out of him in a long breath. Ethan turned to the girl, his voice thick with something deeper than gratitude, something almost reverent. "You didn't just help find him," he said. "You kept us alive." She shook her head. "Max did. I just believed him." But Ethan knew the truth. Something stronger lived in her than simple belief. Something carved from pain, instinct, and experience. She had seen danger before most adults would recognize it. And her dog had followed the thread of that danger through wind, mud, and storm. He looked at Max, the dog who refused to be dismissed, who sensed what none of the trained teams did, who led them straight to the place where truth and terror lay tangled together. "You saved my son," Ethan said softly, voice breaking. "Both of you." The girl blinked fast, tears gathering but not falling. Max nudged her arm tenderly, as though reminding her she wasn't alone. The search teams began to fan out again, not to look for Liam, but to find the man who had taken him, the man who had hidden a hunter's snare in rising floodwaters. But Ethan remained still, his son warm against his chest, Max resting quietly at the girl's side. For the first time since this nightmare began, gratitude flooded him so powerfully it almost brought him to his knees. He had come close, far too close, to losing everything. And yet a little girl and her dog, dismissed and underestimated by everyone around them, had cut through the storm with a kind of courage that defied explanation. The sky began to clear in a pale, fragile way, the first sliver of dawn pushing gently against the darkness. Ethan looked toward the horizon, then at the girl. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Haven." The word lingered in the air, soft, symbolic, painfully fitting. Ethan nodded slowly, emotion thick in his throat. "Haven, you were exactly what your name means today." She lowered her eyes, cheeks flushed, and Max leaned against her, nuzzling her hand. And for the first time since the storm began, something inside Ethan finally eased. His son was alive. The danger had been revealed. Hope, fragile, trembling, but real, returned, and it had arrived not from the authorities, not from military precision, but from a small girl with quiet bravery and a dog who never stopped listening to the truth the world refused to hear. The story would spread, told in whispers, then in awe, about the Navy SEAL undone by fear, the girl who carried her own scars like lanterns, and the dog whose instincts rewrote fate itself. What happened next shocked everyone, but what happened here, in the silence after the storm, this was the miracle. And Ethan Cole would spend the rest of his life remembering it.